I'm Ryan. Ben Shapiro has opinions on transgender people.
I'm Ryan. We'll discuss whether he's drunk or sober when we return to beer and politics.
You know, Betty White really is the greatest Golden Girl. Choosy parents. Choose Jif. He's so mean. He really is. Hey Ryan, are we out of partisan again?
Ben Shapiro says gender is not disconnected from sex, drunk, or sober.
So for me, he's actually a shockingly 0.02 sober.
Okay.
Which is to say, incredibly sober. He's only off on a very small piece here. So typically, sex and gender are linked together, especially when we're talking about social things and cultural things. Where they're not would be something like grammar and writing, where gender is the only thing that really exists. And if you were to say sex, it's not like words have penises or vaginas. So we're saying gender there. So they're going to be separate. And then number two would be this idea of, if you're studying the sciences, you have social sciences and other sciences. So social sciences might study just gender apart from sex, and the other sciences might, biology or biological sciences might study sex apart from gender. So they're going to be mutually exclusive. In that case, though, you can study both, but sometimes you don't have to. Every other time, they are linked. Now, the problem I have with this is he seems to think that our language isn't a living language, that we don't invent or create new words every day, if not every year, that the definitions of words don't expand or contract, that definitions don't become obsolete any longer, that words we used in the 1600s we're always using right now today, right? And their definitions are constant. And he seems to not understand that. He has, I think what he did, and there's something I love about him, which is this idea that he seems to authentically care about words.
Yes.
I think he uses them in precise manners to make his points. But the problem is, I think the fact that he doesn't acknowledge that words can change over time is a detriment to his argument at this point. I think what he did was he found a definition he liked, and he is now going to just presume that's the only definition that exists, and specifically for gender when we're talking about that. So just to give everyone an idea of what I mean by words changing and finding new words, let's just start with a fairly recent one, Google. So it was a proper noun. It was a company name. So it was a word, but you weren't really going to find it in a dictionary. It's just a proper noun. But now it's a verb that you find in the dictionary. We all know you Google something. And you, me, Madam Brewmaster, we all know when we say I'm going to Google it, what we mean by that. Right? So that's a word that exists that maybe he doesn't want to exist. And he cannot want it to exist all he wants, but it is a word. Right? Number two, when we talk about, because your choices are, when we're trying to convey information, that's why we have words, is to convey feelings or concepts or ideas that only exist in our heads to somebody else. Your choice is either create a word or use a word that exists, or you have to modify the definition, which typically is expanding the definition for a word. So I'm going to ask you a question here.
Okay.
Can you give me a definition of dope?
Dope? Sure. It's going to be a guy who's kind of stupid.
Oh, that's weird, because I thought dope was a narcotic, typically referred to marijuana.
Interesting.
Or I thought it was a reliable piece of information, like the inside scoop. What is the inside dope? All three definitions we just talked about, by the way, are in Merriam-Webster's dictionary online. So he's presuming for gender, there's only one definition, and there aren't multiple like there are dope. And here's another thing about dope. Do you think all three of those existed at the same time from day one?
I would be shocked if they did.
Right, I would too. So we've added or amended that definition to include more things we're trying to communicate. He makes it sound like man was formed and man had a dictionary, and that's all we're using today, is his gender dictionary. So let me go through, what I'd like to do is go through three different definitions for the word gender. that I've come across. Remember, we're only decently researched, so there's probably more, and maybe you can try to prove me wrong. But let's just try with that. So the first one, and I'm going to have you help me here.
Yes.
Yeah, that's fun. So the first one is masculine or feminine traits.
Okay.
That's gender.
Okay.
All right, so Ryan, I'm going to assume you are a male.
This is a correct assumption.
Okay, so what would be a feminine trait?
Curves.
Curves, okay. So if you're a male with curves, are you a woman?
I would say no.
You would say no, but what was the definition we just did?
Oh, it was curves.
It was curves. It's feminine traits. Okay, so you're not a woman, but
Okay.
you met the definition there. You don't have to correct it, just want to start with that.
Okay.
Number two, there is this idea of gender roles. That's a big one, especially with the advent of feminism. Okay, so this idea of gender roles. So Ryan, what would a gender role be for a woman?
We'll go super old school and say cleaning the kitchen.
Okay, cleaning the kitchen. That is a traditional nuclear family gender role. Okay, so if you're a man and you're cleaning the kitchen, are you a woman?
Still no.
Still no, but did you meet the definition of gender for woman in that scenario?
I did.
Okay, so it's interesting. All right, so we're going to go to number 3, and this is Merriam-Webster's definition.
Okay.
And I like this one a lot. It is it defines gender as, and by the way, there's other definitions for gender that aren't related to what we're talking about specifically here, believe it or not. But it describes gender in the context that we're talking about as the biological, psychological, and cultural traits associated with one sex.
Okay.
Okay. One thing, and this is what I want to point out, and this is what I think Ben is missing, is it said one sex, not one's sex. So it's not your possessive sex, it's a sex, any of the sexes that we've defined. And it's behavioral, psychological, cultural. The reason, when we start off with the first definition I gave you, it didn't work, is because it didn't cover those 3 things.
Right.
And the second one didn't cover those 3 things. Merriam-Webster's dictionary does cover those things. It's akin to saying, if it looks like a duck, acts like a duck, and thinks it's a duck, as far as gender is concerned, it's a duck. That's what they're saying here. And it's apart from biology. All right, so it's all those things apart from biology, but it's still linked to sex, right? Because it says to one sex, not one's sex. Now, Ben Shapiro goes ahead and says, this was a discussion that we're breaking down that we'll provide you access to, but he actually asks a young lady, well, why aren't you a moose? And the answer is because moose doesn't have the same definition as gender, right? So remember, gender is look, act, think like a moose. But the definition of moose in reality is look, act, think like a moose and have the biology of a moose.
Right.
Now, if we want to say the definition, which we can do thanks to our living language, of a moose is look, act, think irrespective of biology.
She could be a moose.
She could be a moose. But she's not, because we have definitions, and the definition doesn't cover her as a moose anymore. He goes a little further, and he asks her, how old are you? And she says, I'm 22, I believe, is what she said. And he says, well, why aren't you 60? And she couldn't answer that. But my point here is he's trying to create an analogy, right? It's the wrong question to ask. She can't be 60 by the definition of age, right? And how we socially attribute age. Now, I guess she could be 60 months if she was 5 years old, or that kind of thing, but she's not, right? But we're typically talking about years. But what if he said, how old are you? And she said 22. And then he said, are you young or old? I think, what would you say?
I would say she's young.
I would say she's young as well. But you know, it turns out, thanks to the definition of old, she can say she's old. She can. Old is exhibiting the characteristics of age as one of its definitions.
Okay.
All right, so maybe she has prematurely graying hair. Maybe she's got a bad back. Maybe her eyesight is going bad. I think we'd agree that those are attributes of an old person that I would describe. So maybe she's that. You know what, maybe she is well-traveled. Maybe she's lived a full life. Maybe she's been married, had kids, divorced, has lived in 3 countries, had 26 jobs. That would also be a definition of old, which means experienced. So she could be that. And if he asked that and she said she was old, I think we'd largely disagree, but we'd also largely be wrong if she can define it in that way, which she can. So his analogy is bad. And the issue that he's really making here is that, so I said that he was saying that he started with one definition and he used everything that supports that one definition.
Yes.
He largely is saying that sex and gender are exactly the same. Because he has to. Because he's saying if a transgender comes up to him, and let's say it's a transgender woman. So everyone out there who doesn't know, that is somebody who is a male, sex-wise, who is living their life as a woman. All right. So a transgender woman comes up to him and looks like a woman, and he finds out that they have a penis, or they were born with a penis, or they have the right chromosomes, that he's going to ignore every other definition which says it's the attributes. Which largely all of them do. Even if they mention biology, they do it as the minority of the things we're taking into account. In fact, the American Heritage Dictionary also says gender is your identity. Interesting. The thing you identify by. So another definition there. But he's saying the only thing out of all the things that encompass gender is going to be sex, even though across all definitions that you're going to look up, except for whichever one he's using, says that those aesthetic attributes and how you identify yourself are more important than that. He's going to ignore them. In that case, why is there a gender at all? We would just say sex all the time. Oh, well, it turns out those traits matter. Next round.